Have you ever wondered why some traffic stops end in just a few minutes, while others somehow turn into long roadside investigations that seem to go far beyond the reason you were pulled over in the first place? If you've ever been stopped by police and felt unsure about what you're supposed to say or do, then stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll know the exact phrase many legal experts recommend using when an officer tells you to turn off your engine, and more importantly, you'll understand why that moment can be so important. Picture this. You're driving home after a long day. Maybe you've just left work, finished running errands, or spent time with family. Everything feels normal until flashing lights appear in your rearview mirror. You pull over, expecting a routine interaction. Maybe you rolled through a stop sign a little too slowly or forgot to signal a lane change. Nothing serious. The officer approaches your vehicle, asks for your license and registration, and then says something that catches many drivers off guard. Turn off your engine. Most people don't think twice about it. They immediately reach for the key or push the start-stop button because it seems like the polite thing to do. It feels cooperative, it feels respectful, and in that moment, many drivers believe they're helping the situation move along faster. But according to many defense attorneys, that simple request can have much bigger implications than most people realize. The reason is that traffic stops are often about more than the original violation. From the officer's perspective, the stop creates an opportunity to observe, ask questions, and determine whether there's anything else happening beyond the traffic offense. That's why every interaction matters. When drivers automatically comply with every request without understanding the legal significance behind it, they may unknowingly make it easier for the encounter to expand beyond its original purpose. Think about it from the officer's point of view. He already knows why he stopped you. What he doesn't know is whether there might be something else worth investigating. So from the very beginning, he's watching your behavior, your responses, your level of confidence, and how you react to his requests. Many legal commentators argue that turning off the engine immediately can send a message that you're settling into a prolonged interaction, rather than maintaining the expectation that the stop should remain limited to its original purpose. Whether or not that interpretation ultimately holds up in court, the reality is that officers document everything. They write reports describing your behavior, your statements, and your actions. Every detail becomes part of the record, and that's only part of the issue. There's another concern that attorneys frequently raise. Once your vehicle is off, the situation surrounding your keys can become more complicated. Some officers may ask for them. Others may become interested in where they are. In certain circumstances, an officer may claim a safety concern and attempt to justify taking control of them. The exact facts matter in every case, of course, but many defense lawyers emphasize one important principle: maintaining possession of your keys helps maintain control of your property. That's why experienced attorneys often tell people to think carefully before voluntarily surrendering anything that isn't legally required. What makes this especially important is the fact that traffic stops are governed by constitutional limits. Many people assume an officer can keep them on the side of the road for as long as he wants. That's not actually how the law works. The United States Supreme Court has addressed this issue directly. In a case called Rodriguez v. United States, the court made it clear that a traffic stop cannot be extended beyond the time reasonably needed to handle the matter that justified the stop in the first place, unless independent legal justification exists. In simple terms, a traffic stop is not supposed to become an unlimited fishing expedition. There is a legal purpose for the stop, and there are constitutional boundaries around that purpose. That's why many attorneys view the engine request differently than the average driver does. To them, it's not merely about whether the engine is running. It's about maintaining a clear understanding that the stop remains a temporary detention connected to a specific traffic matter and nothing more. Officers are highly trained. They conduct traffic stops constantly. Over time, they become very good at recognizing different types of drivers. Within just a few minutes, many officers can often tell whether they're dealing with someone who understands their rights or someone who is likely to comply with every request without question. That assessment can influence how the interaction unfolds. If a driver appears uncertain, nervous, or unaware of legal boundaries, the officer may feel encouraged to continue asking questions. Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? How long have you been there? Who are you visiting? Have you had anything to drink? Do you have anything illegal in the car? One question becomes another, then another. Before long, what started as a basic traffic stop begins to feel like a full investigation. That's why many legal experts stress the importance of staying calm, composed, and aware of your rights from the very beginning. But here's where people often make a mistake. They assume that standing up for their rights means becoming argumentative. That's exactly the wrong approach. Raising your voice, becoming hostile, or trying to lecture an officer about constitutional law can create problems you don't need. Officers may interpret aggressive behavior as suspicious or confrontational. Whether that interpretation is fair or not, it's a risk many attorneys advise avoiding. The goal is not to win an argument. The goal is to remain polite while maintaining your legal position. That's a major difference. A calm person who understands their rights presents a very different image than someone who appears angry and combative, and that distinction matters. Another issue attorneys frequently discuss involves what happens if you initially turn the engine off but later decide you're uncomfortable with how the encounter is developing. Imagine the stop begins normally. You comply with the request. The engine is off. Then the interaction starts stretching longer and longer. You become concerned and decide to start the vehicle again. Now think about how that action might be interpreted. An officer could potentially claim that restarting the vehicle created concerns about flight, safety, or non-compliance. Whether that interpretation is justified is a separate question. The point is that the situation becomes more complicated than it needed to be. That's why many lawyers argue that if you intend to keep control of your vehicle and your property, it's often simpler not to create that issue in the first place. So what should you actually say? According to many defense attorneys, the key is keeping the response simple, respectful, and direct. If the officer asks you to turn off the engine, one possible response is, "Officer, I'm going to keep my engine running during our interaction." Notice what's missing. No anger, no insults, no confrontation, just a calm statement. You're not arguing, you're not escalating, you're simply communicating your position. If the officer follows up by asking for your keys, many attorneys recommend maintaining possession of them and responding politely. You might say, "Officer, I'm going to maintain possession of my keys during this interaction." Now suppose the questioning begins to expand beyond the traffic stop. The officer starts asking where you've been, where you're going, who you've seen, what you're doing later, and a long list of unrelated questions. At that point, many lawyers recommend invoking your constitutional protections clearly and directly. A simple statement such as, "Officer, I choose to exercise my right to remain silent," can establish your position without creating unnecessary conflict. Then suppose additional time passes. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe even longer. The officer continues investigating while the original purpose of the stop seems finished. This is where many attorneys recommend asking a critical question. You simply ask, "Officer, am I free to leave or am I being detained?" That question forces clarity. If you're free to go, the stop should end. If you're being detained, then the officer must be prepared to justify that continued detention under the law. Now let's talk about an important exception. There are circumstances where an officer can legally order you out of your vehicle. One of the most significant cases addressing this issue is Pennsylvania v. Mims. Under that ruling, officers generally have authority to order drivers out of vehicles during lawful traffic stops for safety reasons. If an officer gives a lawful order to exit the vehicle, many attorneys advise complying with that order. At that stage, the situation changes. You can turn off the vehicle, you can take the keys with you, you can place them securely in your pocket, and before stepping away, many lawyers recommend locking the vehicle and ensuring the windows are closed. Why? Because control of your property still matters. Some attorneys argue that leaving a vehicle unsecured can create opportunities for later disputes about consent, access, and expectations of privacy. If the officer becomes frustrated and asks why you're keeping your keys or why you've locked the vehicle, a calm response is often the best approach. You don't need a lengthy speech. You don't need a debate. You simply maintain your position respectfully. The most important thing to remember throughout the entire encounter is that constitutional rights are most effective when exercised calmly and consistently. Confidence matters, composure matters, and understanding the legal limits of a traffic stop matters. The difference between a brief traffic citation and a lengthy roadside investigation often comes down to the decisions made in the first few minutes of the encounter. That's why so many defense attorneys emphasize preparation, not because they expect conflict, not because they encourage confrontation, but because people make better decisions when they understand the rules before they're placed under pressure. And now you know the strategy many legal professionals recommend when an officer asks you to turn off your engine. Stay calm, stay respectful, maintain possession of your property, know your rights, and communicate clearly, because sometimes the simplest phrases can have the biggest impact on how a traffic stop unfolds. What all of this ultimately comes down to is something much bigger than a traffic stop itself. It's not really about an engine, a set of keys, or even a single interaction on the side of the road. It's about understanding that every citizen has rights, and those rights only have value when people know they exist and understand how to exercise them appropriately. Far too often, people find themselves in stressful situations without any preparation. The flashing lights appear behind them, adrenaline kicks in, and they begin making decisions based entirely on emotion, fear, or assumptions about what they're supposed to do. In those moments, even simple choices can have consequences that last far longer than the stop itself. That's why education matters. Not because anyone is looking for a confrontation. Not because anyone wants to make an officer's job more difficult, and certainly not because every traffic stop is destined to become a problem. Most encounters between drivers and law enforcement are routine and uneventful, but the fact remains that understanding the legal framework surrounding those encounters can help ensure that both sides remain focused on the purpose of the stop and nothing more. The key lesson isn't to become argumentative. It isn't to challenge every request or turn a routine interaction into a debate. In fact, the strongest position is often the calmest one. The person who remains respectful, composed, and informed is usually in a much better position than the person who reacts emotionally or acts out of fear. Knowledge creates confidence. Confidence creates composure. And composure often leads to better outcomes. Remember the central ideas we've discussed. Stay calm when you're pulled over. Communicate clearly. Avoid volunteering unnecessary information. Maintain control of your property whenever legally appropriate. Understand the difference between a request and a lawful order. Know when to exercise your right to remain silent. And if a stop appears to be extending beyond its original purpose, don't be afraid to politely ask whether you're free to leave or whether you're being detained. These are not magic words, they are not guarantees. Every situation is unique, and laws can vary depending on where you live. But understanding these principles can help you navigate a stressful encounter with greater awareness and confidence than someone who has never taken the time to learn them. At the end of the day, the goal isn't to win a traffic stop. The goal is to protect your rights while remaining respectful and cooperative within the boundaries of the law. Those two things are not opposites. In fact, they work best together. The most prepared drivers are not the loudest drivers. They're not the most confrontational drivers. They're the ones who understand the rules before they're ever tested by them. So the next time you see those flashing lights in your rearview mirror, remember what you've learned here today. Take a breath. Stay calm. Think before you speak. And approach the situation with the confidence that comes from being informed rather than intimidated. If you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos covering legal rights, everyday situations, and practical information that could help you make smarter decisions when it matters most. And if you know someone who drives regularly, which is probably almost everyone, consider sharing this video with them. You never know when information like this could make a meaningful difference. Thanks for watching, stay informed, stay respectful, and as always, stay safe out there.